Hello friends, this is Mike Williams. I recently had the pleasure of interviewing songwriting legend Mike Stock. Mike is an English songwriter, record producer, musician, and member of the songwriting and production trio Stock Aitken and Waterman. He has written and or produced 18 number one records in America and the UK, over 100 top 40 hits, and is recognized as one of the most successful songwriters of all time by the Guinness Book of Records. In the 1980s and 90s, as part of Stock Aitken and Waterman, Mike holds the UK record of 11 number one records with different acts. And in the UK singles chart, he has written 54 top 10 hits, including 7 number ones. And so without further ado, here's the conversation with Mike Stock. Now, Mike, what I wanted to do, we talked a little bit before I got started with the show here. I wanted to talk a bit about the whole process of songwriting, and nobody knows it better than you do. And when I was reading your bio on your website, and by the way, folks, it's MikeStockMusic.com, it says that you got started and began writing songs at the age of 7.
Yeah, that is my recollection. They weren't very good, Mike, so we won't go searching them out. The first song I wrote was called The Thunder and the Lightning, and you can guess why. That particular event moved me to write a song. No, so I was keen on doing it, and I can't explain why exactly. I don't know who, nobody ever pushed me into it. But I do remember seeing American movies about Tin Pan Alley, and remember one particular film about a guy who wrote a song called Any Umbrellas, a very old song, I don't know if you are. So I love all the old music, and he sold that song for $50 or something back in 1910, and you know everyone in the world was singing it. I was fascinated by the thought that you could just, as it were, from nothing, from like dig up a piece of clay and make a pot and sell it to someone for a fiver. You know, that fascinated me. And if I could write a song on a piece of paper with you're not damaging much in the world, you've got some paper off a tree, but you've created something else. So I sort of planned when I was that sort of age. I collected 60 of my songs in a folder that my mum had right the way through my sort of successful years. She'd dig it out every now and again and show the relatives. But yeah, so that's what I started, and I don't exactly know why, but there you go.
Okay, so Mike, when you were writing the songs, was it guitar based, piano based, both?
Both, really. We had a piano in the house. I never had music lessons. My older brother, who recently died, but he was classically trained, and he was the lead viola in the German National Opera Orchestra. He left England after going to Guildhall School of Music and went over to Germany to ply his trade, because there's a career out there for classical musicians, more than there is in England. So there was music in our household. And for his training, my dad got a little upright piano in the back room, and so I plinked and plonked on that and taught myself. But I picked up the guitar first of all, and just, I think like everybody I know, who got a Beatles songbook and learned the chords.
Right.
And I really chose that to accompany me singing them, you know. But then I got on the piano, and yeah, so the time I'm sort of 18 or so, I'm quite good, reasonably good, you know.
So in your bio, Mike, you mentioned that being self-taught has its advantages and disadvantages. So what are some of the advantages of being self-taught versus the disadvantages?
Well, for example, if you asked me now to play one of my biggest hit songs, wouldn't matter which one it was, I couldn't do it. I'd have to go to the piano or guitar and work it out again, remind myself what I did. Because if you're a trained musician, someone will say, well, here's the sheet music, play it, you know. So that's what I can't do. I'd have to go and relearn my own songs. And with if I do covers of songs, I've had quite a few hits by doing other people's songs, I have to learn it by ear. And if you asked me to play one of those now, I couldn't. I'd have to relearn it. So that's the difference between me. And my brother, of course, could read music. But what I found with him was when I wanted him to jam along with me, he couldn't. He couldn't jam along. He'd say, well, where are the notes? I want to read the notes. It works both ways, you know, so I'm not that bothered. Yeah.
Okay, so, and with writing your own music, Mike, you mentioned that you had to remember your songs. You had to go back and maybe refigure them out. What did I do here? What did I do there? And that's something myself that I have come across. What happens with me is I will write the song, I will record the song, and then it's behind me, and then I move on.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
And so I think there's a misconception out there that people believe that once you have written something, you're going to remember it forever. I mean, you're going to remember key components of the song, but you do have to go back and get a refresher and say, oh, yeah, I remember this is what I did here.
Exactly.
I mean, sometimes I forget my lyrics like 2 weeks later, you know.
Yeah, well, it's always quite embarrassing because if ever I'm in a gathering where there's musical instruments, they all say to me, "Go on, Mike, play us one of your songs," and I was like, I'd have to rehearse it. I couldn't possibly just do it, you know. Anyway.
Yeah. Now, Mike, from age 7, then you move forward in time, and then you got together and you formed a band.
Yep.
And did you spend a lot of time playing cover music, or was your inclination more to get to original compositions?
That was my inclination and my aim and my love and desire, but you had to earn a living. So I had a band, but we had 2 names. We went out. If I got gigs in, we have a sort of a pub circuit in London, rock pubs you might call them, where there was live music, and they would expect to hear, either rock style of music or original songs from a band. They wouldn't expect to hear Fly Me to the Moon or, The Lady's a Tramp or Night Fever from the Bee Gees, which is what you'd want to hear if you were having a wedding or a social function in one of the hotel ballrooms. So I had 2 bands. It was the same band, but we had 2 different names. When we did the hotels, I played all the disco songs, the dinner music, and whatever else they needed, and charged them, and we're going back 40 years or so now, £500 an evening. When I did the rock pubs, we got 60 quid between us. And what I couldn't have is the manager from the hotel walking around the corner, seeing us in the pub in jeans for 60 quid, and then me expecting him to pay 500 quid the next night to be in the Dorchester. So we had 2 names to hide the fact we were the same band. But therefore I cut my teeth on the American songbook, the old songs, the British classics, as well as all through the Beatles and the disco era. That's what I played.
When you write songs, Mike, what's the process like? In other words, does the music come first? Do the lyrics come first? Do you have moments where you have these dry spells where it doesn't matter how much you want to write a song, nothing emerges, and other times, obviously, where you have these spurts of creativity and you can just write the songs on the spot? But for you, in general, how does it work?
Well, I mean, I can be flippant about it because nowadays, there's an old quote from one of the classic writers, what comes first, music or the lyrics? He said, no, the check. So somebody commissions you to write a song, which is the way I've done it now for the last 20 or so years, 30 years. Somebody says, I need a song by Wednesday for this artist or that act, so I'll just get down and do it. But as it stands, I've got it here, where is it? This is my little digital dictaphone thing. There's 160 snippets on here of ideas that I have, and I sit down at the piano or guitar every single day, and a melody will be in my head, and I've got a pad with titles, lyrical titles. So I'm ready at any time with a bunch of ideas. And there is no lyric first or music first. It could even be a drum beat comes first. It could even be a circumstances, a news item. I really don't know. I think because songs are broken down and you have to get into the detail, I might start more often with the title. I know what the song is called, and then I will set up for the payoff. So if I know it's called, there's one I did with Rick Astley called Never Gonna Give You Up. So if I say I know it's called that, I wrote the title up there, Never Gonna Give You Up. What does that mean? So we'll start off in the verse and we'll tell a story, and it will lead you to the payoff, which is the title. So you can start from the title. Sometimes I start just from a melodic phrase that tickles me somehow. So it can be anything, a million ways. And I think if you're going to do, I mean, I've written hundreds and hundreds, possibly more than 1,000 now. I don't know what the number is. You've got to get inspiration from everywhere. You'll have run out.
You have moments, Mike, when you're asked to write a song and where it's not coming together, and you think to yourself, "Oh boy."
No, I think I've got close to it on a couple of occasions, but I've never walked out of the position where I'm saying I'm writing a song and not come away with something. I've never actually not done it. It's harder than others. Sometimes it just comes.
Right.
You can't stop it. There's just a flow going. The idea is just working. But no, I've never not done it. If I'm saying I'm writing a song today, I will write one.
Okay, so
it might take me a few days to finish it. I might start off and get a bulk of it done, and then I have to come back to it. But
now, when you do this, Mike, are you doing it mostly on your own solo, or are there moments when you're collaborating with somebody in order to bring the song together?
Well, in my collaboration with Stock Aitken and Waterman, in that arrangement, Waterman wasn't a writer or musician. He was our business end of our collaboration, and that's really important. You can't have a hit without some connection to the business that you're getting that right as well, which is why it's so difficult. Like, you can write the best song in the world, but if it doesn't get heard or it's not in the right place, you're. But my writing partner was Matt Aitken in that circumstance, and normally I'd come up with the basic start of a song. I'd probably get the first verse and chorus, but then having to write the second verse, and the artist is very often we work in 5 or 6 artists a day. So sometimes I'd be saying, Matt, can you go over there and come up with an idea for the second verse lyrically, and so we would collaborate in that way. Most of the time, I've just finished an album for an English act been around for donkey's years called Fizz. They were called Bucks Fizz, and they had to change their name. But the process is one of the band members writes a song, I write 5 or 6, somebody writes one, and that's how we've done it. But I prefer to write on my own now.
Okay, so and then when do you think, Mike? What moment in time would you say that you really hit your break? So you're playing the clubs, and then something happened where you're thinking, okay, I could maybe make something out of this as far as a career goes.
Well, Mike, this is I don't like to say. I hope it doesn't come across too badly, immodest of me. I always believed I would. I had an absolute belief that I could write hit songs and be successful at it. And I probably had been successful at writing hit songs before anybody else knew about it. What I didn't have was a way of getting them out there properly, getting them to an audience, getting them to a release, getting them properly produced, properly finished off, properly mastered, properly packaged up and sold. That's what I didn't have. And I was playing in my band, and we were doing very well, and I could have carried on doing the function circuit, playing at weddings, etc. I could have done that all my life, and band members did. I know people who did do it all their life, but I always thought I need to cut away that safety net. And one New Year's Eve, I told the band, we were playing at the one of the London hotels. That is the Royal Lancaster in London. And I said, look, guys, this is it. I'm not taking any more gigs. I'm going down. I built a studio under my house in my cellar. I'm going down there. I'm going to produce some records, and I'm giving up the gigs because I want to move on. And that was December, end of December 1984. And in January, I had this idea, which Matt Aitken came with me because he was in the band as well. He said, I'll come along with you. And we took it to Pete Waterman. It took a month. I cut away the gigs, and suddenly you put your effort and your belief into your future without any safety net. And within a month, we were teaming up. And the first thing we did first thing we actually did together was in February of 85, and then we had a hit. Sorry, I've got all the blooming years wrong here, haven't I? 'Cause it was 83 that I got up the gigs, and we had in January 84 we made the connection, and then in February we made our first top 10 or top 20 UK hit, and then the next thing we did was top 5, a song we'd written, and then a few follow-ups up, but then after that we had the first number 1, which we recorded in 84 but got released early 85. So about getting confused over the years there.
Oh, that's okay. It happens.
Yeah. 83 at the Royal Lancaster Hotel, New Year's Eve. I said to the band, we're giving it up. I'm giving it up. I'm going in the studio. And within a month, we got it started.
Okay, so when you went to Pete, and when you connected with Pete, was he familiar with your work, Mike, or did you have to show him what you had?
Well, because I'd been a writer trying to get arrested for a few years, Pete is a manager, and he was the manager of another producer called Peter Collins, and he'd produced Musical Youth and Nick Kershaw, 2 artists that were successful in the UK, and also produced a song that I'd written. So he knew me as a writer when I walked in to speak to him with this idea that Matt and me had put together. So he had the connections, I thought, because he'd managed a successful record producer. And as luck would have it, he'd split up with him and was looking for some kind of a new collaboration. So that's how these things work, I suppose.
So then how does the process work, Mike? You're writing these songs now. You've got connections into the music industry. How are these bands or these artists connected back into you, or how are you connected into them? How does that work? How does the process of finding Mike Stock as a hit songwriter, how does that happen?
Well, I suppose after we'd teamed up with Pete and we decided, we made a choice, Mike, between us. We had a plan. And I put it together with Matt, and I presented it to Pete, and Pete's famously dyslexic and didn't learn to read when he was young, and he wasn't able to read the plan. He said, "Mike, don't give me this, it's like a car manual, I don't understand it." What we actually chose to do was find a marketplace that was underexposed and probably undervalued, and this was the club dance marketplace. Back then in 83 and 84, there was something called Northern Soul and Boys Town, which was the club scene, quite active in the UK. And in that you'd create, there'd be a club and a DJ playing records. If he played something that the crowd didn't like, they'd leave the dance floor. So the DJs were hot about understanding what pleases their crowd. So we checked it out, we realised what it was, and we started to give them material of that sort. The thing that we did differently is we produced it better. We were looking at improving the quality. Most of it was quite cheaply done, but these clubs were packed. And the normal route to hit record is via radio. That's what people were aiming at. Radio wouldn't have touched dance music with a barge pole. They hated it. They looked down their nose at it. We thought, well, actually, when a radio DJ is in his ivory tower, putting the records on, spinning the discs on radio, he hasn't got instant feedback. He's no idea whether the audience likes it or not. If you're a club DJ, you lose your job. You've kicked people off the floor. You don't bother coming back. So we had to give records that people would like and the DJs would like. So we managed to kind of inveigle our way into the hearts and minds of the DJs and the clubs, and we made records that suited them. Only my aim was to put, rather than just pointless disco. I wanted to put songs on top of the beat, and things like "You Spin Me Round" we did, and things like it had some Hazel Dean songs, which definitely aimed at the gay clubs, but "Spin Me Round" had a more general attack, and but they were for people to dance to, as well as sing along to. And whereas before you couldn't really sing along to much of it, it was quite a noise, but it got people on the dance floor, and they were very loud with the cowbells, which set off their sound to light systems. So they were all flashing drums, so the lights would go. But that was only for us the strategy to get us through the door. Eventually, radio started playing what you would call dance music. So "You Spin Me Round" got to #1 in the UK, and so the BBC was forced to play it on their chart rundown. And then we sort of knocked the door down. Then we removed the wooden frame of the door, and then the bricks one by one, so there was no wall at all. And instead of getting people to follow what we were doing, or for us to follow trends, people started to follow what we were doing and started to copy us. So that's really, but I mean, this is a long story, Mike, because it takes us through for 10 years, and we ended up splitting up, Aitken and Waterman. Well, Aitken walked away first of all, and then I stayed on with Waterman for a couple of years, but the industry closed us down. The industry said, we're not going to allow you to take so much market share. We were taking 28% of the UK market share. That's just 3 guys in South London,
Yeah, it's interesting because as you're telling the story, Mike, I'm thinking to myself, you actually created a genre.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
In a way, right? And you did it in an organic way.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was just going to ask you, because you're leading into it, that had to impose upon the overall music industry's agenda as to what it is they were going to play on the airwaves. Absolutely. It was okay to be in clubs.
Yeah.
But it's another discussion to take it to the radio waves.
Absolutely.
But before I get there, though, how did you break it in with the DJs in the clubs? Did you take your songs to them and say, hey, could you play this? What do you think about this? How did that work?
No, Matt and me went once to a particular club to get a flavour of what was going on. I didn't stay very long, and I didn't like it one bit. But I did see the point, and I realised that it's youth. People between the age of 18 and 30 have an awful lot of energy, and music seems to be part of anybody's diet to a certain degree. Whatever you do to the music industry and the way they have done what they have done to close people down, it doesn't stop people's love of music. They'll still find it somewhere. And so this sort of club music was frowned upon. It was definitely Club 1830. And but they were the ones with disposable income and with energy to enjoy it. So we used to laugh at you can imagine. I mean, Mike, I'm going to say this. You might not agree with me, but the Beatles were a dance band. That's what they did. Look at the crowds. Look at what they actually did. Playing at the Hamburg Club. That was just nightclub setting. Right. That's what they did. Mac Show. Put a show on. Get us all excited. That's all it was all about. Excitement. Radio, by comparison, was so staid, so safe. And we just realised there was another world out there. What they didn't have were polished records. They were slightly cheaper. They were just chucking them out any old rubbish as long as you had a drum beat on it. So we thought we could just do a better job. And it was a marketplace that was underexploited, underloved. So we thought we could, and it was a tactic that worked.
So you created a market.
Yeah.
That was overlooked or untapped by the music industry.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Okay, they weren't expecting it. But as soon as you poke your head up off the parapet, they take aim at you. They didn't spot us coming, Mike. We were through the door before they realised.
And then once they realized it, Mike, then I'm assuming they tried to get some level of control over you and your songwriting team, your production. Yes.
I was approached by Matt and I were approached by a successful recording manager who tried to poach us away from Pete Waterman, bribing us with our own fantastic studio and our own sort of other inducements, which I absolutely said no to. And I made notes. I made notes on some pads when I write lyrics. I was writing this song, and it was sort of describing this about trying to drag you away from someone, break us apart, because then you could be divided and one thing or another. So I'm a very loyal person, Mike. You know, I'm married to the same woman now for nearly 50 years, and my youngest son works with me here in the studio. My oldest son works for a news agency. I have grandchildren, and we're a family unit, and we've kept together. If I'd have taken this person's offer, you know, we wouldn't have been where we were. Looking back, and at the time I felt it was just an attempt to break us up.
Right.
And that was really at the beginning. It was after our second hit. It was really at the start of it all. But we didn't go along with it. But suddenly, with your head above the parapet, making music, so we were being blocked everywhere. Contrary to, if you ask record people, industry people in the UK now about Stock Aitken Waterman, and they would tell you that we got loads of help from radio and the media. We didn't. The only time we got played on radio was in the chart rundowns when they had no choice. We had no coverage. A little bit later we got coverage because radio started to spread its wings, and it wasn't just the BBC. There was a radio station called Capital Radio, and they loved us because we were the sound, and their slogan was the sound of a bright young Britain. So that was our music, and they championed us. But that was a bit later on. But that actually maintained our growth and extended our career somewhat, because the BBC would have shut us down immediately.
Now, you did have an issue with the radio industry, yes, where you mentioned before that you ran into some issues with them, and there was a lawsuit.
Yeah, I sued. It's the BPI, which is the British Phonographic Institute, which is the governing body of UK music. I say governing body, but I joked with the chairman and said, "Well, where'd you get your authority?" He said, "Well, we were founded in 1940. I said, "No, you weren't. You were founded in 1970 something." You know, and it's you know, but they would. It's like proving your authority because you have some provenance, you know, some history that goes back. And Mike, just to get the calendar right, this was in 1994. After Stock Aitken Waterman had split, suddenly I'm number 2 in America. So well, Matt's with me, Matt Aitken. We have a number 2 in America. We have number 1 in the UK on our own bat, if you like. I set up a new label, and I'm off and running again. And the chairman said, "We're not going to let you do to us what you did to us in the 80s and 90s." I said, "What do you mean you're not going to let me do it?" He said, "Well, we can't allow you to do it." I looked at him in the eye and said, "Well, what are you going to do? How are you going to stop me if people buy the records?" I found out what they did, and they virtually ruined me. And they can do anything they like. So they ripped. So we were following up a hit single, which was number 5 over in the UK, and follow-up comes out and it stalls at number 41. Which is the graveyard, because radio will only pick up records in the top 40. If you're at 41, no, it's invisible. Why did that stall at 41? I call you need to know that the charts were shifted around in the early 90s to basically to block Stock Aitken and Waterman. Suddenly, it wasn't an honest poll of people's record buying habits. They used to use Gallup and Maury. These are old pollsters who collect data, and they would make the charts out of that. Well, in about 1992, they formed a company called Millward Brown, which was the joint between CIN and Millward Brown. CIN with a BPI, Chart Information Network, had a joint venture with a pollster, and they got the data, they sent it to CIN, and the CIN Chart Information Network presented the chart that the majors wanted, not the chart that the public wanted. And I screamed about it because the BBC was saying this is the most accurate chart, the fastest chart, it's the accurate chart, and it wasn't accurate at all. It did not reflect taste. It was a carve-up. So I had that argument with the chairman of the BPI, and he told me he was going to block our efforts. I sort of challenged him to do it, and the very next record stuck at 41. And when I called CIN and said, why is this record at 41? I know I've done this many copies. He said, well, you had formats, so you had a CD and a cassette back then, and possibly a piece of vinyl, a 12-inch. You were allowed 3 formats. He said, well, you had an extra format out. I said, I didn't. He said, yeah, you had an extra format. I blooming well didn't. And then he said, well, your cassette, your barcode wasn't working on the cassette, so they may have been bought at the shops, but they didn't register at the tills. I said, they did register, because I'm clever. I was clever to their games. I said, I've always had my own barcode tester, and I run it through. Here it is. I have my barcode test and put my seat. Look, it works. But they said, well, that was about 60% of our sales, because we were going to a young market who loved cassettes at the time, so that they were discounted. That put us at 41. And the very next record I put out was going in the chart at somewhere around 7 or something. I get a call at lunchtime on Sunday by somebody who works at the chart, who said, your record was going in at top 10, but we're putting it down to 20 because we don't like the sales patterns. You don't like the sales patterns? What do you mean the sales patterns? Well, somebody went into a shop in somewhere and ordered 20 copies. So, I sort of had no idea what they mean. The next record that goes out, they don't even bother putting it in the charts. They just pull it out totally. It's not even appearing in the top 200. Why have you done that? Well, somebody went into a shop in Sheffield and ordered 27 copies. So I put on the front page of the Music Week, which is the weekly paper for the music industry, a £10,000 reward for the person to find me who bought 27 copies of my record. And there were no takers. I then got a lawyer.
So they're accusing you of stuffing sales? Yeah. Is that what they were accusing you of?
Well, I don't know. On that particular issue, when they failed on the barcode, when I said I'd check my own barcode, they moved it to you were sending out a team of buyers, is what it was, to go into shops and buy them. Now, normally, if they're clever about that, and I don't know how it works, I assume you wouldn't go up and ask for 27. If you're doing it, you're trying to do it discreetly. But some bloke asked for 27. And the worst thing was, according to the report from the chart people, when questioned by the shopkeeper, he said, yes, I'm trying to hype the record into the chart. So it doesn't matter what the truth was. I was not hyping any record.
Right.
They were just finding some excuse to blame me. So I called their bluff and said, well, if you can find me the person, maybe the shopkeeper at the till they can find the person, I'll give him £10,000 to name the person who it was. And there were no takers. Realising that, I sued them. I got my lawyers onto it, had a meeting with the BPI's lawyers and the chairman. They stuck to their guns. Then they said they raided a lockup in North London and had collected 1,500 copies of my single, this particular single, which proved that somebody had gone out and bought them and stacked them in a lockup. A lockup I've never heard of, or I don't even know where it was now. So I had a meeting with them. I said, okay, you're telling me that I bought those records, or I organised to have those records bought. So who do they belong to then? They belong to me. So I'll turn up at the meeting and I want those 1,500 records there, and I'll take them away with me, because if I paid for them, I own them.
Right.
So when I got there, they didn't have them. There wasn't 1,500 records anywhere. All they had was one record in a plastic bag, in a Woolworths plastic bag. So this is a sample. I said, "No, what my record looks like. Where are the 1,500 you confiscated? I'd like them back, please. You said I bought them." Anyway, a few weeks later, because I'd sued them and they got nervous, they had another meeting and they said, "Mike, can we just, we'll destroy all our evidence and can we just move on from this?" So in the end, I agreed and said, "Look, forget it," because I had many other problems at the time, Mike, because my new studios, I was #1 in the UK, I was #2 in America, had just made these records, and it had been undermined by the London Underground. They were putting in a new Jubilee line extension, and they weren't supposed to come underneath me. I found myself suing London Transport. So here am I, not only suing the BPI, but I'm suing London Transport. And then I was trying to get my copyrights back from Pete Waterman, and Matney was suing Pete Waterman. So I was stretched so thin. I moved on with the BPI, eventually sold that building that had been undermined, and I moved on. But that whole period from about 1995 to 2004 or 5, I was just fighting battles. I mean, they stopped me. They completely stopped me in my tracks. And it was all organised, really. They can organise anything, Mike. I was so occupied with people suing me and me suing them. And it cost me, £1 million just to put some legal actions together. And, and
all because, Mike, you didn't play ball, really, right?
Yeah. All because I didn't play ball.
And this is what people don't understand, is they can jam you up. And legal action is one of their aces up their sleeve. They can tie you up in court with litigation. It'll cost you a lot of money. And it gets most people to the point where they say, "You know what? I can't do this anymore. I can't afford to do this anymore. I've got better things to do."
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mike. And the point was, when suing Pete Waterman for the copyrights, what Pete had done in the meantime had sold them to Warner's. So I thought I was suing Pete Waterman. When we end up getting into court, we're actually suing Warner Chappell, who have extremely deep pockets.
Yep.
And so the barrister said to me, "Well, we're going to go into court now. It's going to be £90,000 per day, and this is going to go on for weeks. £90,000 per day." So at the end of a week at trial, I said to the barrister, "We can't afford to go on." I said, "So before judgment is entered, let's withdraw our claim and leave it like that. So the matter's not been resolved." But I wasn't going to have because we weren't going to win with Warner Chappell, with Warner's. Well, and they were at the time Time Warner. So, this is a massive global organisation. We couldn't possibly win. So we withdrew our action, and no determination of the ownership of that was ever made. And I'm not going to go into it now because Pete Waterman and I have patched up our lives, and we're not enemies anymore. But as you say, there are ways to entrap you, ways to divert you, ways to block your passage, ways to do anything they want to, if they determine to do so. And it's just little old me.
But Mike, you still had a tremendous. You had tremendous success, even with all of these obstacles in your way. Were there ever times when they approached you and they tried to lure you into their machine? In other words, were there moments where they tried to get you to play ball?
Mike, I think I know what you're getting at, because this is one of the things that now I know something about, but at the time I didn't. Although I was asked to go along on one occasion, the way it was put to me was one of our sort of habitual routines after a day in the studio at 10 o'clock at night. Matt and me, or people, would go down the pub for a pint just to relax. And so we went down, and on this particular occasion, I can't even tell you his name now. I couldn't remember. He was just introduced to me by Pete. He was a stranger, but we got talking, having a laugh in the pub. Then he said, "Mike, you want to come up to? We've got a hotel that we use. It's a weekend. Get anything you want there. Girls, boys, drugs. It's not a problem. It's great weekends. Everyone loves it." I said, sounds a bit dodgy to me. He said, I don't have to worry about that. The head of the Metropolitan Police will be there. I said, sounded like a script from Monty Python. And I said, no, I don't think, because actually where it was up in the north of England, and I didn't want to do that. So I said no, politely. Looking back, what I know would have happened. I mean, sex and drugs and rock and roll. Who cares? It's the music industry. That's the way it's always been. Wasn't my life, and I knew that's what the story was. The thing that got me was, once you're in a situation like that, and you do take part in something, and you've witnessed it, and they've witnessed it, and it's all been, you're theirs forever. They've got
compromised.
Yeah, absolutely. And whenever they call you for whatever they need doing, you've got no choice. So that's why I said no. And the lesson I learned long before I made it in the music industry, my wife and I used to drive a battered old car, and it used to really let us down a lot. We had it parked outside a flat, and some bloke who had a bit of a shady background said to me, tell you what we can do, Mike, we can pick the car up, you leave the keys in it, we'll take it away, we'll dump it in the river, nobody will ever find it, and you claim the insurance. Bobby, my wife, and we said, well, I mean, that might get us out of a few problems. And then I said, Bobby, we can't do that. That person will know for the rest of our lives we've committed an insurance fraud.
Right.
And, if I ever do make my name in the music industry, he'll be knocking on the door very quickly. No, you can't compromise yourself. You can't do that. And I remembered that lesson when thinking about this. So I'm not going to do that. I never did, and I don't believe that I was ever approached again. Although I did find out the power they had when they wanted to pull me down. They can do it in other ways, Mike. But
now, yeah. Did you ever sense, Mike, that even though that you didn't connect into them, you didn't play their game, that they still needed you? I mean, they still needed your talent, right? Because there were artists that were coming to you that needed hit songs.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting dynamic. Do you ever feel like, well, you've had a lot of success. I mean, you're very, very accomplished. But you ever think to yourself, well, there's a ceiling. In other words, I cannot penetrate beyond this point. They won't allow it. I got to operate within this range here. Anything above that point, Mike Stock can't play here.
Yeah. Some of the artists I've worked with have broken through. I mean, Kylie Minogue is a girl. You don't know her in the States, but she played Glastonbury last year. She did a big set there, went down really well. Obviously, somebody like Rick Astley goes out and tours. He does very, very well. Some of our acts have lasted many, many years and keep working. At the time, but of course they have managers. I never dealt with their managers. I only ever had a one-to-one with the artist. So Rick Astley comes in, his manager's over there somewhere, they're doing the deals. I don't want to know about that. We're singing a song here, this is how it goes. You sing it, we get you out of the way, we finish the record. That's what I did for years. All of the artists, I had a relationship with them one-to-one, but not with their managers or with their various record labels. So whatever else went on, Mike, I didn't.
Yeah, that's what I meant, Mike, when I said that they still needed you because you were still generating, delivering hits.
Yeah.
But you personally,
yeah,
from your personal perspective, did you feel like, hey, I've hit a ceiling, they won't let me above it? As an example, based upon what I read at the beginning of the show here, you clearly have more number ones than Paul McCartney.
Mm-hmm.
Yet he has superstardom.
I will never be superstar. I don't want to be, Mike. No,
okay.
You see, Paul McCartney sings his own songs. He doesn't have to write for loads of other people like I do. He only sings his songs. And in a way, that restricted him, because I can still write for a 16-year-old girl. Doesn't bother me, or a young band, it doesn't bother me. I'm not singing it. I don't look foolish, but I think Paul or Billy of late looks a little bit foolish. He doesn't sound very good, and some of his recent albums, some of the stuff is just horrible. You know, that's all I can say. And this is a guy I love. But yes, you're right. Glastonbury, the doors are open and have been open for so long for him.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. Going to Paul or Billy, I'll refer to him as Billy. I know you're familiar with the whole Billy Shears piece of this.
Yeah.
A lot of people have asked me personally, why is it that he's still out there? His voice is shot.
Mm-hmm.
And it is coming from a guy that you and I, Mike, spoke before we got started here about how much both of us were loved the Beatle music. I personally liked the Wings period. I know some people don't, but I did. I liked a lot of Billy's Wings material. But he's still out there. He's going to be 85 this year.
Yeah.
And he's still pumping it out. I mean, do you have any thoughts on
I do.
Why that might be?
I do. And in common with the Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger. They're all of that sort of age now. And so it does bother you. It does bother me completely that he's wrecking. I don't want him to sing those great songs anymore, personally, because he's ruining them. He knows he isn't delivering them. Does he need more money? So it can't be he needs more money. But people need more money. The people that are controlling him, the system that's got him in the grips that he's in, need the money. They need to pack out Glastonbury. They need all the theatres, all the venues that he's doing. You know what? I think if someone said, we'll let you out of your contract now, Billy, go and have a lie down and stay out the rest of your life and have a nice time, you know, he'd take it like a shot. Because touring, permanently on tour, the guy, is tiring, it's stressful, and he's not delivering the goods. So it can only be that he has no choice.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So he's got something there contractually.
Yeah.
I'll let the audience decide what that might be. That's keeping him in the game at a point when he shouldn't be there anymore.
Yeah, he's says, or according to reports, he's a billionaire now. So he doesn't need the money, but it's the other people in the machine they've got going that need the, you know, I don't know how many Beatles reissues they're going to be, but they've just done Get Back the film. There'll be another one round the corner. This is such a money spinner, such a cash cow for all these people. They can't have him retire. You've got to keep going, Paul, you know. It's a shame. It's torture, I think.
It's got to be very, very difficult.
Yeah.
It has to be. One of the things, Mike, I wanted to ask you is, because I get this a lot, many people don't understand that song credits can be assigned to somebody who didn't write the song.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that, how that process works?
Well, look, you can, these days, I was astounded to see on certain artists, like there were 7 writers, or in some cases even more. How did that work? So who gets a credit as a writer? Well, if you were in the room when the song was written, you can get a credit. Or if you said, I'd like this drum fill over here, or it doesn't matter. Or you've added a word. Thank you, here's a credit. You know, I tried to track the Lennon-McCartney earlier Northern Song stuff, and I can't find the trail on that. With me and my songs, they're all registered under my name or whoever my co-writers were, and the PRS, the royalty flows obviously to me and doesn't go off in detours. So you can say anybody actually wrote the song. Nobody actually has to ever go there. And to some degree, I've credited Pete Waterman with all of our songs, and he didn't. But we were a team, and we agreed to do it. And I shook hands with him in 1984 that we would split everything, and I've stuck to that.
How about artists, Mike? Though, how about artists that you're not in collaboration with, you're not in partnership with? That would you have a song that you wrote, that Mike Stock wrote, that contractually is being credited to an artist that had nothing to do with the song? In other words, it's eye candy. It's to give the illusion that this artist is writing songs, but when in fact they did not.
I've shared copyright on that basis.
Okay.
Reluctantly.
Okay.
I don't particularly want to name names on that.
That's okay. That's okay.
But you know, there are famous artists, a couple of famous artists, where I agreed to share the writing interest with them because they had a publishing contract and their publisher was going to give them an advance as long as they came up with a commitment of so many songs. And you know, the things that go on, Mike, you know, it's a business after all. I'm not moralising on it, because you know, you do what you have to do at the time. But the example you gave of people taking credit for something is who didn't deserve the credit is it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Okay. And how about, Mike, you work with so many artists. Have you seen an evolution of artists where at one point you can look at an artist and say, this person has talent, whether musically, vocally, and then over time see a degradation where that criteria of having some level of talent really doesn't matter anymore? That they can just fabricate whatever it is they want to fabricate. Have you seen anything like that? Because I'm talking from my own personal perspective. I have seen that as I'm watching the music business and the various artists going back to the 1960s when I was a kid. But you being in the business, have you seen that as well?
It's not important these days, I think. I mean, yeah, what do I mean? Everything is visual now. So you better look good. It doesn't matter what you sound like, because we can fix that very, very easily. And we can make you sound like a robot. That's what most of these modern recordings sound like. They put them through vocal tuners. You can sing any series of notes and we'll put them in the right order. Producers will. But you know, back when I was working in the 80s, we didn't have that. So if a singer was going to sing in tune, you had to work on it. And it was a sweat. And they had to have talent. So you don't really need that anymore. And you know, I can think of, I mean, there are marvellous examples, Mike, of how it used to be. Frank Sinatra, you'd stand in front of a mic, a big old mic, and behind him is an orchestra, and Nelson Riddle's done the arrangement, and it's a live take. Yeah. They wax a hot one there and there in front of your eyes, and Frank will sing, and then he'll step back if he's going to project too much, and the orchestra comes in a bit loud, and then he steps forward, and it's all a dynamic experience of people who knew their trade and knew how to deliver it. I don't know anybody like that anymore. That's all gone. And you need a video on YouTube or wherever. So it's all about the visuals, the optics. You've got to appear to be something. You're not actually anything like that. We know what deep fakes are like these days. It's difficult to tell. Yeah, so I think that talent has been degraded, and the music industry has lost its way. They have to keep it going, but it's not as important anymore. That they can obtain their societal, you know, their social engineering ambitions through the other methods. Right. The internet, you know, people were saying for me for years, when are we going to find the new Beatles? All the way through the 80s, and who's going to be the new Beatles? And they kept saying it in 1995, and I said to the chairman of the BPI, no, it's the internet. The internet is the new Beatles. That's where kids are now. Eventually, he said, yeah, everyone tells me that, but no one can tell me when. I said, if you're asking when, you're already too late. It's like when you go home and your wife's had a haircut and she waits 20 minutes and says, what do you think of my haircut? You've already lost it. You hadn't noticed. It's happened without you even realising. And the internet, music used to absorb people, you know, kids back in the day when we were teenagers, when I was a teenager, you waited for the next record. You couldn't see the Beatles. I never saw Elvis Presley, except on a film occasionally. You know, you didn't see him, you had to hear it, and you fell in love with the sound of it. So the people who made the sound had to be really good at that. Nowadays, everybody can be seen, so that's taken over from the sound of it. And it's the internet anyway, because we were competing in the late 80s with video games were starting to come out. And we could see the writing on the wall. That was taking teenage pocket money. You know, and eventually everybody's got their iPhone. Everyone's stuck into that. That's the new Beatles, and that's how they're engineering society. They did it through pop music before, but now they don't need to.
Right. Now, Mike, let me ask you about the use of studio musicians. I know you know a lot about this, and I have said that the Wrecking Crew model was very prevalent, not just here in the United States, but it existed everywhere in the UK and so on. How prevalent is the studio player or the studio musician in pop music versus people believing that the actual band on the album cover was laying down those tracks?
Well, I doubt that's probably happened on very rare occasions. In fact, it's a nightmare. Whenever I had to do a band, I just had to get rid of them quickly, and Matt and me would finish it off. Matt and me were probably talking about the Wrecking Crew or the. I've played keyboards, bass, string arrangements, brass arrangements, drum programs on more hit records than anybody, because Matt and me were the musicians. And if I was a production team, I wouldn't want a half-baked drummer taking up a week of our time trying to get the drum track right. You just wouldn't do it. It's because you can't waste the time. There was a apocryphal, really. Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Trevor Horn, great producer Trevor. We all listened to the drums, what great drums they were, and somebody told us it took 6 months to get the snare sound, you know. And when we looked into it, it was a Lin 2, you know, straight out of the box. But these are the things that get talked about in the industry. How did you get that? How did you get that? And it's all done by people like Trevor Horn, brilliant producers. You know, I'm struggling to think of a band, actually, of the past 20 years that really play everything in the studio. Because going out live, you can bluff it like mad, and most of it's not live anyway. Biggest surprise to me was when Stevie Wonder mimed. I saw him in London, and he wouldn't go on because he'd lost his Synclavier program discs. And I saw Michael Jackson miming at Wembley. The thing is, Paul McCartney doesn't, and he should. He's the one who should. Because Michael Jackson did the dance routines and everything. You can't sing that accurately and do that dance routine. So it's all faking it one way or the other. I don't think people really mind. It's not really. It may be an eye-opener to some, but, you know, I'm only waffling now, Mike. I don't really know the answer because I just made my own records.
Yeah, no, it's fine, Mike. It's making perfect sense. I went to go see Foreigner in concert going back a number of years ago. And it was their 40th anniversary tour. And when I was there, I'm watching the show, and you know, being a guitar player myself, they have these big screen TVs, and I'm watching the guitar player playing the guitar sound that I'm hearing out of the speakers, and it doesn't match up. All right. So as soon as I saw that of course piques your interest.
Yeah.
And now you're looking for everything.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think they got maybe 2 or 3 songs in, and I was the person I was with. I said, "They're miming, they're lip syncing, and they're miming." And I left. I left. I couldn't deal with it. You know, it was a moment. It was a moment in time when you come to this realization that this belief that you had about these artists completely comes apart. It falls apart.
You know, and like, they will go to great lengths to try to fool you that it's live. I remember Michael Jackson even had a pre-recorded howl back on the mic. So he picked the mic up and it whistled, you know, you get a howl back. And ooh, yeah. Everyone was convinced, therefore, that what was coming out was what he was. That was just pre-recorded. I've done it on a couple of live shows that I've backing tracks for people who are going out live. You've got to make it look live. You've got to play it for all it's worth. And the truth is, nobody can really reconstitute live what they recorded in the studio. It's so detailed and so, you know, just the effort that's gone in to get it right. You wouldn't risk it live if you had any sense.
Yeah. I have a friend of mine who's out of Germany, and he's a professional sound engineer, and he's been in the business for decades. And he's passed along some work that he's done, and I can't really talk about it because have to keep it confidential, but he was talking to me about live performances and how they are completely remade, post-production.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, down to the audience, everything.
Yeah.
And so you get a before sound of what this sounded like, and then after, and it's just night and day.
Yeah.
So many times when you're buying these live recordings,
You're not. No.
that is not what you heard that day if you were
No.
there at the venue.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You know, and it's very difficult for people to get their heads wrapped around this.
Yeah.
Now, I did want to talk a little bit about, because I don't want to take up too much of your time here, the Beatles. So when you were on James's show, you'd mentioned that the Beatles were a manufactured band.
Yeah.
It was music to my ears, no pun intended. And so you were a Beatle fan,
Yeah.
right? When you were younger, same as I was. I was in the, I call it, I was in the cult. And then something happened, like the light switch goes on and you start to wake up to what's going on. And the Beatles, in my opinion, are just indicative of the industry itself.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately for the Beatles, they are the most prominent band, in my opinion,
Yeah.
in pop music.
Yeah.
And so when you start to talk about the Beatles not being who we were told the Beatles were, a lot of people get very upset. Very, very upset about it. And it wasn't an easy thing for me to, a pill for me to swallow, Mike, when I first got into the research. But what are your thoughts about the Beatles?
Yeah, well, actually, some of your research, Mike, which I've seen, and in particular the 4-hour one you did on who wrote the songs, was a shattering moment for me, really. And when I learned that the song Yesterday, that very famous Beatles song, actually originated in 1895, an Italian aria. And it's not the lyrics, of course. But it's the, you can hear. See, the thing about the song Yesterday, it's a brilliant little tune. It sets it up brilliantly. The phrase, it's in F, so you play the chord of F, and you play E minor, A7, D minor. That melody that Paul sings, so that gets you. That's the bit that works and sets you up for the whole song, and that's the exact bit that's in the Italian aria. What I therefore thought was a stroke of genius from Paul turns out to be something else. And of course, Paul covers it with the story that he dreamt the song. Woke up one morning and there it was. So to me, I'd heard that story many, many times. And then when you revealed what you did in your presentation, I realised that's why he came up with that idea. Because if you'd really written that song, you'd be telling everybody, this is what I wrote, and I came up with this. I didn't it didn't just appear overnight. I don't know who gave it to me, like it's a gift from heaven. And in looking into the rest of it, I too have seen footage, supposedly live footage of the Beatles in the 60s, 62, 63, 64, around that period, where what's being played isn't matched by what's coming out. It's been overdubbed later. So they were doing, and this is the thing that really, why the Beatles are the apotheosis of the art of manufacturing something, and there must be a purpose behind the manufacture, is just to recognise there's so much footage of them from the very earliest time, photographs and film in all sorts of places, all over in the studio, candid stuff and all, apparently so, in taxis, in hotel rooms, in the early 60s. And this is film. People are walking around with cans of film. They get 15 minutes film, they have to change the film. It's a massive, on somebody's part, somebody's organised all of that and said, we must capture all of this, we've got to capture all of this. Why would you do that? Once they've been successful, once they've been on the Ed Sullivan show or something, you think, okay, maybe, but this is prior to that. And I always thought their arrival in America just a few months after Kennedy's assassination wasn't coincidental. There needed to be a distraction.
Yeah.
American people were quite rightly And I'm seeing it now in the UK. Boris Johnson has just resigned. I hope that doesn't timestamp what we're doing here, might too much. But, you know, and I'm wondering what's actually happening somewhere else. I should be looking over here somewhere, shouldn't I? And so the Beatles, I can see from the beginning that this was so managed on every level, to the extent that they filmed every step. And I've tried to work out what the purpose was, apart from social engineering. We know about some of the things that have happened. I don't want to go in too deeply, but, you know, breakup of certain family ideals, certain breakup, you know, sort of gender identity, a whole range of things was started back then, and the seeds are being sown. But also, whenever the Beatles went anywhere, they went with an entourage. Loads and loads of people, and they went with the backing of the Foreign Office, the UK Foreign Office, and MI6, and the support and protection. And it suddenly occurred to me that they were a great cover for what else was going on. You know, wherever they were going, our Secret Service were there, you know, getting into things, rifling through cabinets. I don't know what they were doing, but you know, it strikes me that was certainly a reason to have all of that effort put into them. And also the songs, you know, once you are aware that Yesterday didn't come from the Beatles, it came from somebody else, you then look at what else did. And obviously there's Bad Penny Blues for Lady Madonna, there's a whole range of other things, you know, and you can say, well, they didn't really invent that either. Anyway, I could rattle on, I don't mean to.
And what I've noticed, Mike, is that the songwriting abilities from the Beatle era, from 1962 through 1970, all of that ability seemed to have it dissipated into, you know, when he went solo. In other words, John Lennon is credited with the song In My Life.
Yeah.
When do we hear anything even close to that type of composition in his solo career? My answer is you don't.
No, and you know, the Let It Be album, which I think is the album where they did write all their own songs, is to me very, very substandard in every regard. It's ugly in lots of ways. Apart from Long and Winding Road and a couple of others, you know, it's very ugly. And I watched the 3 hours, or was it 6 hours, of Get Back.
Yeah.
It's just very clear. Billy, Paul's replacement, as we would say, was talented, but fighting against the other Beatles who weren't, much less talented. So I can't yet factor that into the Fab Four. You know, we know what happened after '66. You get Sergeant Pepper's, and that's a whole new thing. Up until then, you know, the albums Revolver, Rubber Soul, and it going back were okay. The one I liked least was Beatles for Sale. That's a rock and roll covers album, really. But when you really analyse how many great songs, most of them are McCartney, but you do have In My Life, and you do have a couple of the singles, I suppose, that might be John Lennon, supposedly. But it's not... I can't say it because I hate to say it, but it's not all that good, you know. Some of it's pretty average, and I don't know what happened to him. Why George Harrison didn't want to play with the Paul McCartney character in Get It Back? You know, why it was awkward. Why John was off his head and didn't want to be there, and but they filmed.
And Ringo was just there.
Yeah, I know. Well.
He was just there.
Yeah.
So I think the Get Back documentary and the Let It Be film in general actually is quite an eye opener. If you take a step back and you get away from the admiring and the worship and all that, and you take a look at what the initial objective was, which was to write 14 brand new songs within 2 weeks, really.
Yeah. To
do a concert, and then that would become a television show, and you know, they ended up doing 5 songs on a rooftop.
Yeah, and Get Back twice.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So anyway, I don't want to beat it to death, but I just wanted to get your perspective on it because, like I said, you are very well equipped to observe and make a comment on
Yeah. Okay.
on that stuff. But I want to thank you so much, Mike, for coming on, having the conversation. It was a great conversation. I would love to have you come back anytime
Yeah.
you'd like.
Mike, I'd love to do it. Thank you. I've seen you so many times in your presentation, so it's a bit like I know you already. Your face is so familiar. Anyway.
Well, thank you. No, it's been a real pleasure. And if you stick around, just after I end the interview, Mike, I could just chit chat with you a little bit more.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Well, folks, that's it for the show. And again, thank you to Mike Stock for taking the time to come on to talk to me. It's been a great interview, a lot of insights, and I'll have the show up as quickly as I can. Thanks, and have a great day.